3, 2, 1. I think we're live now. Hey guys, welcome to another show. We got Daryl D with us. It's an amazing show. I'm going to play the intro and get started. Yeah, that's great. All right, awesome. Right. Is it playing? Okay. Yeah, I played a little long. All right. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic podcast. I'm really excited about my guest today. Today I have with me Whistleblower. I'll just read you his bio. I mean, he's been on my show many times. He's been on my show like 3 or 4 times. You guys have probably seen him on Journey to Truth. But I recently got to meet Daryl again. I met him last year, but like I got to see him again this year at the Full Disclosure Now conference. So we're going to talk about a little bit about our experience. I know I've been doing recaps with everybody, but I still think it'd be interesting to get his opinion because he was involved in a couple panels at the conference. So it was really interesting. A little bit more about my guest. I'll read his bio. My name is Daryl D. James. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1999. He served 7 years, including 1 year in Iraq with the Naval Mobile Construction Battalion. A CB7 in the UK. He passed through what was a metal detector. It measured every biometric signature he had, including his IQ, which was measured at 195. He was soon recruited to join the secret space program and guaranteed a position as a pilot in Solar Warden, the Starfleet that monitors our solar system. After miscommunication with a 9.5-foot reptilian, he was sent to the mines on the moon. But then, Daryl has had some more like revelations about his interactions with the Taygetan Pleiadians, and he's also had revelations from his SO, I believe he calls it, who was Robert, who is like very prophetic about things that were going to happen in the future. So with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome back to the show. Daryl, thanks so much for coming back on.
Yeah, of course, Robert. Good to be here.
Yeah. So let's start off. What was your takeaways from the conference? Like, did you enjoy it and everything?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. Got to see old friends and heard new things. I liked the panels, and I was on a couple. And yeah, it was a good time because mostly it was in my hometown. So it was only 15 minutes from me. So that's the best part. How?
Yeah. I like the fact that we all can like hang out and everybody gets to like hang out outside and like talk and stuff like that. That's my favorite part. But like, how did you like the panels? Did you think they were?
I apologize. You broke up in the end.
I was gonna say, how did you like the panels? Did you think the panels went pretty well? Like, it was pretty good.
I did. Yeah, I thought the panels went really well. Everybody got to say.
What panels did they have you on again? If you were on the Montauk.
I was on the Montauk. I was on the Secret Space. I was on things like that. Those kind of panels. Yeah. 2 different panels in the entire conference.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. It's amazing. And then, did you have any other like favorite presenter or anything from the conference that you like? That you resonated with, or anything like that, or any standout moment?
Yeah. I mean, I was doing like a lot of other people where I was just hanging out with everybody else at the conference, but I like Laura Eisenhower's presentation with new insights about, Tiamat and the asteroid belt. And I was discussing that with her after her presentation. And because I was told by my, executive officer about things like, Tiamat, about it was once a world, the asteroid belt was once a world.
Yeah. She has amazing information. Yeah.
And I like Matthew Mornane as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Daryl. There's a little bit of a delay. I apologize. Like there's I don't know why there's a delay. Yeah. Well, then maybe we should start off with this. Did you have any memories that you wanted to talk about, like that you haven't talked about recently yet on another podcast or anything?
Well, yeah, I've had some recent memories. The full moon of last November, I remember feeling like a tingle right here, like on my hairline, and that like brought me back to a new memory. And it all started. My mother passed away, a couple years ago, and
I'm
I
sorry for
remember
your
being in the
loss.
office. Yeah, I remember being in the office with Robert, the executive officer, and he started telling me just like everything about my life, things he shouldn't have known. And he said he was telling me about I was a king for a limited time on a different world, and he told me like Nordics, Pleiadians, Taygetans, and he said I had like hundreds of children and things like that. And I was just he was kind of losing me, and he could tell. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he said, I saw your father. And I said, my dad's been dead for years. How did you see my father? And this was in 2006. He said, through the looking glass. And I said, what's looking glass? And I really had no memories at this time. This was when I was getting out of the Navy, and I was just, I got to talk to the master chief. I got to talk to the executive officer, the commanding officer. And when I got to the XO's office, he just started telling me all these things. And he said, I saw your father. And he could tell I wasn't believing him. And whatever this looking glass was, I didn't know what it was. And he said he moved to St. Petersburg, Florida in 1956. He wore glasses. He rolled up the sleeves on his shirt. And he was a mechanic, and he raced cars. And this really blew my mind. And he asked me, he's like, why did he roll his sleeves up? He said it made his arms look bigger, and it kept him cool. And he said he got a job every 3 or 4 months. And I said, well, he already had children by then. Wasn't that kind of irresponsible? He had children from his first marriage. I'm from my dad's second marriage. And he said it was the mid-50s in a growing city. Everybody got a new job every 3 or 4 months. And, unless you were like a manager, you had a degree. That's just the way it was. Your boss upset you, and you just got in your car and you drove 5 blocks down the road, and you got another job for equal pay or more. He said he had a trade, so he could do that. And when he was telling me this, I kind of thought, is this guy a demigod? Like I didn't know what looking glass was. Still, I didn't know what any of this stuff was. And I said to him, I said, don't tell me when my mother dies. I said, you can tell me anything else, but don't tell me that. And he kind of like looked around, and then he looked right at me, and he said, your mother dies 3 days after Paul Rubin. And I said, Pee Wee Herman. And I said, how do you know that? He said, because you're in the hospital with her, sitting down next to her, and you're watching the morning news, and you see that Paul Rubin dies, and she dies 3 days later. And when I was in the hospital, when this happened, when I actually saw in the morning news that, Paul Rubin died, and I was sitting in the hospital with my mother, I kind of felt his presence. I kind of felt him with me almost. And, I knew right there that, she'd be gone in 3 days. And when he told me that, it kind of opened up. I mean, when this event happened, my mother passing, it kind of opened up a whole other part that he told me that I just was in denial, I guess. I kept it in my subconscious, a suppressed memory. And when he was telling me this, I said, why did you tell me that? I said, why did you tell me when my mother died? He said, because I need you to go back into the chair, Daryl. Like, I need you to get rid of these memories. He said, most people commit suicide within 6 months if they have memories of the 20-year and back. It's going to be difficult to live your life if you still have all these memories with you. And I need you to go back. And that was like his main mission at the time, was just to get me to go back into the chair to, wipe out all these memories of mine. And it was like the density chamber, which is it artificially pushes you up from third to fifth density. And it's something you have to go into before you join the program, because ETs are much too fast, much too strong. They're way too intelligent, and we just wouldn't be able to work around them, in third density, considering they were fifth. And fifth density, when you go into density chamber, it pushes you up artificially in the fifth, and it makes you stronger, faster. Your IQ goes up 200 points, and you become more of a collective. It's like you reach like a higher spiritual level, I guess is how you put it. And he was looking down my timeline, is how he put it, where he was kind of like seeing my future, I guess you would say. He's kind of almost like living my life, fast forwarding past the more mundane parts, and looking around and seeing what was going on in the more important parts of my life. And he saw like that I came to the realization in November, like I said, of last year on the full moon. He realized that I realized something, and he said, "Daryl, this is bad. You have to go into the chair. You have to go into the chair right now." And I said, what's going on? And he said, the reptile that tortured you, which when I came back for, sticking my thumb in that reptile's eyes, when he was trying to put me in a density chamber, I thought it was a gas chamber. It had this airtight door, the watertight door and everything. And they strapped you into a chair. And that's what I thought it was. I was trying to get away. And, in self-defense, I gouged his eye to try to get away. And so I'm already back from the 20-year, and there was this reptile that was, torturing me. And it was the reptile that inhabited Michael Aquino. And one of the guys on base one time, this guy named, we called him Lando because he liked Star Wars, from like Lando Calrissian, but his name was Orlando. And he just randomly came up to me one day, and the command was kind of try to, see if people still had memories of the 20-year and back. There were like people who joined, and then people who were asked to join, but they didn't. And the people who were asked to join but didn't, they kind of kept tabs on the people that joined to see if they had any memories. And one time he came up to me and said, Johnson told me that there's this machine that can extract the consciousness, the soul, from a being. But they have to be around, they have to do it before puberty, but they can't do it when they're too young, like 3 or 4, because the bones will get brittle, because the body's mostly stationary. It's used as like a vehicle almost by another being. So they wait till they're around 9 or 10 years old, and they pull the consciousness out of this person. And then another being can kind of like astral project their consciousness into this body and move it around like a meat puppet, like a machine. And he said that's what happened to Michael Aquino. And, I said, well, what happened to his like original soul? And he said, I don't know. And I just thought it was really weird that he brought that up, because, Aquino was I saw him once on this base. I just saw him one time at the quarterdeck. And so getting back to Robert, and his revelation was my revelation, basically. He was going down my timeline, kind of like living my life. And he said, Daryl, this is bad. It's really bad. And I said, what? And he said, the reptile, it's with you right now. And I said, like, what do you mean? And it's him. It's the reptile is with you right now. And he explained to me that it kind of like connected itself to me, because when I was in the caverns below the underground base, there were caverns down there. That the reptile was so old. It seems like ETs, they can all go forward in timelines, but only when they reach around 2,000 years old can they go back in timelines and actually alter a person's timeline if they're in your presence. And he said it happened when I was 7 years old and I was molested. And it kind of like made a connection there, went back in time and went into my I asked him, was it like a possession? He said, no, not really. He can just kind of influence you if you're not strong enough and feed off your loosh is basically what it was. He was just like, you know, and it wound up that it didn't leave me until I was 47, which was what last year in November was, where I felt a tingle on the full moon. And for like a week, I felt a tingle. And I remember being in the underground caverns and this happening. I was like on a torture rack, and it was going, back in time, my timeline, and just altering my timeline. Now, when I joined the program, I remember the first class petty officer, when I walked through a scanner, the scanner I told that you talked about, he said, it looks like you have somebody else living in there with you. Were you molested as a kid? And I said, yes. And he said, well, that explains it. We'll get it out for you. So while I was in the program, it wasn't present. But as soon as I came back, it reconnected. And I kind of remembered the reptile. Like, I remember being on the rack, and I remember him doing this, and it took hours, probably like 4 hours, I would say 4 or 5 hours, which was like 40 years to me. It was just kind of skipping around. It went back in time, my timeline. It was just moving fast in certain spots and saw me at other points of my life and tried to interact and things like that. So, yeah, he realized when I was in the caverns, the reptile said, I've lost control over you, is how he put it. And he said, but before I do, I'm going to leave my mark right here. And he smacked me in the head. And that's where I think where that tingle came from that brought me to this, other revelation altogether. And I asked him, I said, I remember him. He was like black, and he, wore like a red hood and red robes. And I asked him, I said, well, what was that? What was that reptile? And he said, Sobek. And I said, who's that? And he said, Egyptian god of fertility, guardian of the Nile. And I said, like, what? And he looked just like the statues. And but he was like able to, because he was fourth density. Yeah, because he was fourth density, he was able to kind of change and shift himself. And sometimes he'd look more snake-like, and other times he'd look more crocodile-like. And I remember when I was in the bar on base, there was a guy called the Goon who was like a Satanist, which was like a British army. He shaved his head, and he actually took the children from the cages to produce the drug. I'm not sure what you're going on YouTube with this, so the drug you get from children. But yeah, he was actually one of the guys that did that, like harvested children. And we were at the bar one time, and we were drinking, and I would wait for him to get kind of drunk and tell me things, and then he would start opening up, because he was there for my torture. He was in the caverns when everything was happening. And he said, those waves you feel that he said, have you ever done acid? And I said, I've done mushrooms. And he said, well, mushrooms are similar. Those waves you feel, they feel like they're coming down from the universe, and they feel like they're passing right through you, and you feel wave after wave passing through you. And I said, yes, I used to call those echoes. And he said, echoes, that's a good word for it. And he said, well, they live between the echoes. You could see between the echoes. And he said, you could see Aquino. He didn't like that. So he went back in time and destroyed your childhood, so you couldn't see him anymore. And I remember when I was in the caverns with the 5,000-year-old reptile, because that's how Robert and we started discussing it like that, because he said if we bring him up too much, we could conjure him because he's fourth density. And I was like, what do you mean conjure him? He said, he could be in this room right now and we wouldn't even know it. The only reason you saw him is because he showed himself to you. And then he realized later on I could just see him anyways. So when I was in the cavern with this reptile, there was like a table off to the side, like the right of me. And I was on this rack, and he had like, all his knives and pokers and scrape things he was torturing me with. And I could see him and he looked over at me and he just disappeared. And I looked down to the left, and then he was just there looking at me down to the left. And then he disappeared again. And then he was in the back of this room we were in to the left. And I looked up and I could still see him. And then he walked towards me slowly. So he didn't like that I think he was probably, I couldn't see the portals, but fourth density beings have the ability to like create portals and go places and things like that. And I think he was just hopping from portal to portal to see if I could see what he was doing, and I could see it. So that's what like caused them to want to do this, because their whole like shtick is like the shadows. They, that's their whole power. They stay in the shadows, the subconscious. And when people have the ability to see what, like, their tricks, what they're doing, they don't like it. And I remember the first thing he did was what I came to, and I didn't know what was going on. You go through like a temporary amnesia when you're go from fifth density to third, or third density to fifth. It's like you kind of forget like what's happening, what's going on. You're really dazed and bewildered. And I remember this reptile in my face, and it said, "Don't you remember me, Daryl?" And I was confused, and I didn't know what was going on. And then I kind of saw it like blend two images together, is what it looked like. And then all of a sudden, I saw a Kino in front of me, and I saw the reptile that was inhabiting the body that is a Kino, the 5,000-year-old reptile, kind of scurrying into the back in the shadows. And I looked over at Kino's shoulder, and I said, "Nice trick." And then he walked out of the shadows, and he said, "Well, it works on most." So he saw me several times, like being able to see his tricks. And it's not an actual, like, their bodies don't shift and bend and turn into a reptile. It's like a trick they pull on your mind, and they can do that. And I think that's where the shape-shifting reptilian shapeshifter comes from. So anyways, I'm in the office with Robert again. And I said, what's an ancient Egyptian reptile doing in Cornwall? Because this was in Cornwall, England. And he explained to me that there's caverns deep within the earth, but because of the Cornish cliffs, there's been waves hitting the cliffs for millions and millions of years. And it's created a complex like cavern system very much closer to the surface of the earth. And they live in those caverns. And he, told me about there was a war long ago, and the war was a stalemate, and the agreement to the stalemate. And we got outside help, but we participated in the war. We fought against them. We used to worship them as gods, like in Egypt and things like that. But the agreement to the stalemate was we got the top side, but they got the underground. So all these underground bases are kind of located in areas where this honeycomb effect gets closer to the earth. That's why they are where they are, with these underground bases. And they're all owned by the reptiles. It's like reptiles, elongated skulls, grays, things like that live in these caverns. And other beings do too, but it's mostly negative beings. And well, I said to him, what the hell is like a 5,000-year-old ancient Egyptian reptilian god doing in Cornwall? And he explained that part to me with the caverns and Cornwall, because of the cliffs and everything and the waves. And he told me that ancient Egyptian history isn't, I believe it's 3150 when they say Egypt started. I could be wrong. But he said that's not real Egypt. That's not when Egypt started. He said Egypt started around 10,000 BC. And at first it was the avians, which, like Thoth and stuff, like the bird-like beings. And he said they looked just like the paintings and the statues they made of them. And I said, so they had feathered heads and flesh bodies? He said, no, the flesh bodies, he said the bodies would have been feathered like the rest of them, but the flesh bodies represented, they're flesh and blood like us. They're humanoid. They're mortal. Like that's what that was trying to depict, with the heads being feathered or furred or scaled, and the bodies being flesh. That's what that represented. And he said that they built the Great Pyramids, and they were once covered in sheets of gold, and the obelisk was once covered in sheets of gold, and those pillars underground. And I said this, I think, at the second Journey to Truth conference. I was on a panel, and one of the audience members asked, where do ETs get the power for their world? Do they get it from the ether? And nobody on the panel knew. And I said they get it from the magnetic field of their world. And, coming back to this, Robert explained to me that those pillars were to pick up the magnetic field of Earth, and it transferred that power to the Great Pyramids. Gold's a great conductor, and it was a way to communicate with their home world, to teleport with their home world. And they're, reciprocal in the sense that positive ETs, if they take something, they give something. So they took a bit of land from these people, but in return, they gave them power in the sense of, and he said because they were so technologically primitive, they didn't think that their minds could handle like real ET tech. So they basically gave them things like, a means to light their homes, a means to like heat their homes, things like that. And that's what they got from the Great Pyramids, because the obelisk was kind of like a Tesla tower, like wireless energy. And he said then around 7,500 BC is when the felines and the canines came. And they look just like that too, the canines kind of look almost like a Doberman Pinscher with like black face, and black pricked up ears. And the felines, and then he said, and they lived in peace with the avians, and they, cooperated together. And then the reptiles came around 3150, which when we're told when ancient Egyptian history starts. And he said that they got into a war with the felines and canines and avians, and they drove them off Earth. And that's where, Sobek and stuff like that comes from that era of Egypt. And he also told me that 70%, and this is on Reuters, but he told me this in 2006, 70% of all men are related to King Tutankhamun. Of all British men, 70% of all British men are like have this the same Y chromosome in common with King Tutankhamun, and 50% of Northwestern Europeans have the same or Y chromosome in common with King Tutankhamun. And when I was asking him, what does Cornwall have to do with like ancient Egypt? And he said that Cornwall would have been where their capital city would have been of Britain back in those days, like 10,000 BC even. There's been civilizations that we weren't told of, things like that. And he said that they got their tin from Cornwall because they were still a Bronze Age people. And tin is still the number one export from Cornwall to this day. And tin is mixed with copper to create bronze. It inhibits the crystallization of copper after it cools when you melt it. So it makes it stronger. The tin inhabits. That's why, bronze is kind of dull and copper is shiny, because it inhibits that crystallization process from when you melt copper to when it, cools off and becomes solid again. So yeah, because they were still a Bronze Age people, even though they had, lighting and heat, that's about all they got from the pyramids, because they were considered too primitive to actually have ET tech. They still relied heavily on bronze, and it was a really big trade route, like Northwestern European and Britain itself and things like that. So, I mean, those were like the revelations I wanted to talk about.
Daryl, did they tell you? Oh, yeah. Did they tell you like when they think the pyramids were built? Do they have an idea, or like did he tell you like what? Does he have an idea? I'm just curious. Like, does he think it's like maybe 10,000 years ago? And I'm wondering, like, do you think like at that point, like 10,000 years ago, do you think there was other alien races here, like Pleiadians, Anunnaki, stuff like that, like who might have, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there could have been. Yeah, it was 10,000 BC, he said, whenever like true ancient Egyptian history happened. But I mean, he said there were like, he told me, the Atlanteans were descendants of like the Atlanteans and everything like that. He talked about that, and he said all that knowledge is in the catacombs of the Vatican, and he said that's supposed to be released, sometime in the future. And what was it? Caesar didn't burn down the Library of Alexandria, but he burned it down. But beforehand, he took out all the scrolls and tablets and all the information. And it's all in the catacombs of the Vatican. The world's gold, this is in 2006. I think they got it out by now. I don't know if you've seen like, the vans and the truckloads of armored cars driving around the Vatican. I mean, that's just, conspiracy, but he said that, yeah, the world's gold was there, and he said it was a septillion. Sorry?
That's interesting.
Yeah. He said it was like a septillion, and
that's so interesting. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, septillion in American dollars, like back in 2006, and he said that a portion of that would be given to the people of Earth, but it's enough to make everybody on Earth 100 millionaire, is how he put it. And we can't just make everybody 100 millionaire because nobody would work. So they're gonna give a certain amount to the people that are what we deserve, the wealth that it's part of our world and what we deserve, and everything was like kept very organized. Everything was labeled, what countries it came from, what continents it came from. And he described like the Great Reset as like everything will go back to the countries where it came from. So like a lot of the gold will go back to Africa and like South America and things like that, Asia. That's when he went on about how Russia would become the next world power, and the Earth almost went into a war over who was going to become the next world power. So they just all decided it would be whoever has the most natural resources. So Russia is number one, China is number two, and Russia will become the world power. China will become the economic power. And I think like North America, he said it would become one. Canada, United States, and Mexico. We're going to give Alaska back to Russia because it rightfully belongs to them, he said. But yeah, North America would become like eighth, I think, in the world power. And the whole thing with Ukraine, where we're sending over all these Abrams tanks and the Russians are just blowing them up. He said a lot of those tanks were remote control. And it was a sign of goodwill from the United States saying that we're disarming. Like we're allowing Russia to basically blow up all of our tanks and a lot of our, a lot of our equipment as a sign to say that the United States is now disarming and we're not the world power anymore.
Wow, that's huge. Do they? I mean, does Russia have their own secret space program? It seems like I think Michael Sala talked about that, or like, and do you think they're at war with our secret space program right now?
No, I don't believe so. No, I remember seeing like, like a Russia's secret space program. He told me about it. China has their own, and I think he even said like India, like different countries in Europe, things like that. But yeah, there's several nations that have their own secret space program, but you're at like a higher level. You're not just higher density, but everybody's trying to. I mean, there are negative, sellouts and things like that. If you want to call them that, they're on Earth and maybe they want to keep the draconian or just the rule that we're under right now of like the negative that are working for them. But a majority of the nations of Earth like want to break free from this. He told me that we're artificially kept in third density. He said if there is a hell, like Earth would be it because there's no other world like ours. Like we're kind of in last place. Like there's no other like world that's still in third density anymore. And we're supposed to be in fifth by now. But because we're like artificially kept there, and he told me about like a grid or something like that kind of covered the Earth. And now they're using that grid to kind of keep these negative ETs from coming in or leaving and things like that. And he told me about the asteroids they would say it was like a space debris, like from space stations and things like that. And he said it would look like asteroids with gold and silver sparks trailing behind it. And that was actually like these negative ETs trying to leave Earth because they know they're losing it and they're being shot down by different, secret space program militaries that are banding together like Solar Warden and others.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. So Wow. So Solar Warden's basically would you say they're bad or good, or is it like indifferent?
I think they're, a positive. It's like a joint task force almost with like the Pleiadians and some Andromedans, Arcturians, things like that, and even like felines and canines. A lot of these beings are like trying to help us, avians and things like that. It's like a joint effort, and it's basically like Earth has been under the control of this negative force artificially for so long, and it needs to be free now. Like you're breaking kind of like a galactic law. Like you can't just keep beings down artificially. You have to let them keep evolving.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And you have memories of the Taygetans, which we talked about before. I wanted to get into that a little bit. Like just you remind me of that. Like what do you remember? Like and was this after you went to the mines? So like for people that don't know, after you got into that altercation with the reptilian, you were sent to the mines, right? Kind of like similar like Tony Rodriguez was a slave, so you were also kind of like a slave, right? And then or no, I don't know. And maybe you could tell people. And then after that, you went to Taygetan. Is that correct?
Yeah. I asked Robert. I said I wanted a timeline when I was in the office with him. I wanted to figure out what was going on because I had no memories. And I said I remember being in mines. I said, was that in Earth? He said that was in the moon. I said, well, how long was in the mines in the moon? And he said 3 months. And then he said 2 years in the Dark Fleet, which is like a German off-world, like mercenary force almost that primarily worked with like the reptiles, Draconian Empire. And then he said the rest of the time you were with them. And I remember, another time I was at the bar with the goon. He said, you were the king. You said you were the king of the Taygetans when we were torturing you. I said, well, Taygetans. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, do you know Billy Meyer and the Pleiadians? And I said, no. And he said, well, check that out. That's what they're based off of. And I asked Robert in the office, I said, they're the ones they call the Pleiadians, right? And he said, we call them Nordics. And I said, what do they call themselves? And he said, Taygetans. And yeah, I remember that. It was just, they kind of, Robert said you could do things that they never saw before and things like that. I remember I could take like the ship itself we were in, which was like a 4-kilometer long starship called the USS Nimitz, which means like, United States ship, secret space, Nimitz. And it was a 4-kilometer long starship. It looked similar to the ships in Battlestar Galactica. And it had like a soul in it powering the ship, like a volunteer that, not really powered it, but the AI was so complex that it, since our consciousness, our souls are part of God, and since God is all knowing, then the soul is all knowing on a level. So to be able to interact with that kind of an advanced AI, you actually needed like a soul to interact with it. And I remember there was like a once a week kind of family day, where you didn't work, and it was just like you talked about your week with others, and it was all them. It was all like Pleiadians, and would watch the kids play and things like that. It was just like a family day. And I remember I could do things like manipulate the aura of the ship itself, and create almost things like little cartoon characters and things like that. And the kids liked it. And the adults asked me like, how do you do that? And I said, like, how do you not do it? And I said, try. And I remember they would try, but they just couldn't do it. So it was just like certain things I could do that they couldn't do. And I think that had to do with I had an experience when I was like 11 with this woman who was a Kabbalist, and her husband was like high-ranking like mafia. Florida, a lot of times, New York mob will have a home in Florida. I was just like an 11-year-old kid, and I remember my father was telepathic. We used to talk together, and this girl named Jen could do it too. And so she wanted me to go to her Halloween party at her house. And her mother, I mean, as soon as I got into her house, she grabbed me by the hand and took me into her mother's bedroom. And she was like putting on an outfit that looked like a mix between Stevie Nicks and Elvira, ready to go to a Halloween party. And the woman said to Jen, "Is this him?" And she said, "Yes." And the mother said, "You say the father can do it." And there was this all telepathic. And she said, "You said the father can do it." She said, "Yes." And what about the mother? Not as much. And the sister? No. And the mom took me like by the chin, this Kabbalist woman, and she did something. I don't know. We locked eyes. You know, I was a little kid. I was like 11. She lifted my head up. We locked eyes, and I just saw like red and orange and like flecks of blue. And she kind of shook my head and snapped me out of it and said, "You know, you're a powerful little boy, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Good, now go play." And after that, it felt like for years, I think I just got over it. For like 2 years, it was like I was hallucinating, but I was only like, 11 years old. And yeah, like I would see kind of people at the corner of my eye, shadow beings, things like that. It was almost like I was like, and Robert explained to me, he thought the chair didn't push me down properly in the third density. He said, "You're still partially in fifth. And something happened, we need to get you back in the density chamber to push you all the way back down in third." And he, going down my timeline, seeing the revelations that I had later on in life, he realized it was actually that woman, this Kabbalist, that unknowingly put me partially in the fifth density. And that's why the chair couldn't push me down all the way, because I was already partially in fifth before I even joined the program. And I think that's a big reason why I could do the things that these, Pleiadians were fascinated by. It was just something that was a part of me. And you get into the whole time travel thing with the reptile, the 5,000-year-old reptile, that's pretty confusing. I mean, as far as I know, this would have been even though he changed my timeline, changed my past, this would have been part of my past no matter what, as far as how time travel goes and everything. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that, the Pleiadians were really interested in me for, things like that.
Yeah. There was one question from the audience. New England Dirt Roadie doesn't know who you mean when you say he. You mean Robert, right?
Robert, yeah, Robert.
Can you
my
explain to
executive
everybody
officer.
who Robert was? He was, for the people that might have not heard your story before, he was like your commanding officer, right?
He was my executive officer. He's second in command. He told me he came from the year 2580, and he went back in time to change the timeline because something happened. The Satanist one, he told me the duality of the earth was the Anglo-Saxon and the Satanist. He told me about the mission of the Anglo-Saxon. And he said what happened was that they had these breeding programs that went on for like 100 years each. And we got into a Hillary Clinton won. And on her second term, we got into a nuclear war. And all these breeding programs were happening. And they bred everybody together. And then they took the lighter skinned people. They brought them to Asia. They did a 100-year breeding program with the Asians. I said, "What do they do with the darker skinned people?" He said, "They killed them all off." And then for 100 years, they were all kind of like coexisting. We're now one people, all our problems are over. And then they realized they made a mistake, that we weren't going to make it past fifth density without the Anglo-Saxon, is how he put it. And so they started a breeding program to try to extract that gene for 100 years, and it wasn't successful. And when he was going down my timeline, he said, "You think I look like Mike Pence in the future?" And I said, "Who's Mike Pence?" And he said, "He becomes the vice president of Trump." And I said, "Trump, the billionaire, becomes president?" This is in 2006. He said, "Yeah." And he did. He was like a spitting image of him. And I even said, like, "Do they all have that constant scowl on their face like you do?" And he said, "Yes." Like Mike Pence, he always looks like he's scowling at you. And this guy, the executive officer, Robert, he had this scowl too. And he explained to me that they're born to black hair. Their eyes are usually brown, sometimes blue or green. He said when they get around 50, their hair begins to salt and pepper. When they turn 70, their Oh, when they turn 50, it's salts and peppers. When they turn 60, it turns pure white, their hair. And their eyebrows turn pure white by 70. Their average life expectancy is 110. He said we did have a guy live to 140 something, just like we have people that live, over 100 on this timeline. And yeah, he said I said 110. I said that's awful. I said Star Trek, they live into 120. And he said we didn't reach our true potential. And he said we should be living over 800 years old. That's how long the off-world Germans live. They live over 800 years old. That should be our life expectancy. So it's almost like the Bible, like, how long people used to live back in those days and things like that. Oh, they live hundreds of years. That was a true event as far as he told me. But yeah, he came from this timeline, and I said, was your mission successful? He said, yes. And
Wow.
I said, well, why are you still here? And he said, I said, well, what about your parents? And he said, my mother's gone, my father's gone, my brothers and sisters are gone, all my friends are gone. I said, well, why are you still here? And he said, I don't know. And he had no idea why he was still like around, even though he should have never been born because the timeline was changed. And I said, well, is your wife from that timeline? He said, no. And then I said, well, what happened to your daughter? Because he had a daughter. And he looked pretty terrified. And he said, I don't know. And he didn't know why. Like, he was still around. But yeah, he explained to me that, we originally looked more like the Slavic people. Like, the Slavs are our cousins. And he said that we came from the asteroid belt, Tiamat, and what I was talking about earlier. And I don't know if it was like a civil war. I think the reptiles maybe were involved too. And that war was blown up. We tried to go to Mars, but because of the debris from a world exploding, it destroyed most of the life on Mars. And then we eventually came to Earth. And he said that the, sub-Saharan African and the Aboriginal people from Australia, they were the original inhabitants of Earth. And he said, but because we interbred, like the Anglo-Saxons interbred with the Neanderthal, and they had a direct connection to the Earth. They were a native population. That gave us a direct connection to the Earth. So, and he explained to me that bump on the back of your head is a Neanderthal trait. And he said Slavic people don't have that. And if they have it, then they have, Anglo-Saxon genes. And he said the reason why our ancestors used to war with them a lot, like the Vikings, they were always invading Russia and like taking wives and things like that. He said because those people knew that they were slightly more spiritually advanced than them, and they were jealous. So like in envy, we used to get into wars with the people who lived in Russia and take a lot of wives and things like that, like the Vikings and everything else.
Wow, this is fascinating. He gave you amazing information. This is really good stuff. Let's see here. You mentioned children with the Nordic beings before, like, yeah, like did you have like children with the Nordics? Do you think, or something like that?
Yeah, whenever I was in the office with Robert,
I guess.
he said, what do you remember? And the first thing that came to mind to me, and it was weird, it was like he was just say things to me. I don't know if it was like a fifth density thing, but he could just, like he said, the first technology you're going to see is a smartphone. And he said it's based off the smart glass pad. And I said, what's a smart glass pad? And he would just say, the smart glass pad, you remember. And when he said, you remember, like just floods of memory came back of me using this. It was like a plexiglass kind of looking pad where you put your palms on it to activate it, and images could come out. And it was just like a very advanced computer that was thin as a sheet of glass. And so as I was speaking with him, he said, what do you remember? And I said, I remember a woman. She was tall, sitting down. She had long silver hair, big blue eyes, big cheekbones. There was a boy on her lap. I kissed the boy on the head, and then I kissed her. And he said, that was mother. You had a son with her. And I said, I have a son. And he said, you have dozens of sons and hundreds of daughters. So he said I had the hundreds of children with them. And he basically explained to me, he kind of had the attitude of they were just using you because, they wanted your genetics. And,
Wow.
I said to him, well, you were just using me. So what's the big deal? Yeah.
Then we had a question here. This was from Renee in the Rumble chat. And thanks for watching on Rumble, Renee. She says, that time you mentioned, Daryl, about Hillary Clinton winning, I do believe this is the same timeline Arkeem saw. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean,
did you mention
probably.
Something about
I mean, but yeah, like Robert explained, it was just like terrible. It was horrible, like all out nuclear war, just hundreds of millions of people dying, forced breeding programs, rape, everything else for just centuries. It was just like a really dark, horrible time, and we avoided that timeline. And the proof is, Hillary Clinton didn't become president, and she should have, but they actually changed that timeline. They changed it. Any other questions? But this is going to be a little bit shorter because I wasn't going to go into my entire story.
Cut out there.
The new memory.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say we just do a couple more audience questions. This is from Jason. I kind of know the answer to this. Jason wants to know if you have a book. I know you don't have one yet, but you are writing one, right?
I am working on it. I'm about halfway done. Yeah, I'd like to get all the details. I have an AI device on the back of my phone where I can just dictate, any things that kind of come back to me, just all these kind of random memories and things like that. So I'm not going to use AI to write the book, but, I have just like a little dictation device on the back of my phone. I'm always using it and things like that. But the book is, I would say, about halfway done.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then Sally Forth wants to know, wait, where did the question go? Oh, here it is. She wants to know, are blood types relevant? And I was going to say, like, I guess that's RH negative. So are blood types relevant in like what our lineage and stuff like that? Do you feel like I know Penny Bradley talks about blood types a lot too, but like
yeah, I would say blood types as far as what I know. I remember before I joined the program, there was a first class petty officer kind of like interviewing me for the program. And this was after I walked through that scanner. And he said, you're RH positive. I'm A positive. He said, but we can fix that. And he said that like ETs don't like the RH positive because it's something, I don't know what the theory is, something about the rhesus monkeys, that there was some sort of disease and it kind of like certain of our ancestors caught this disease. And I hear people that have, it's not really a detrimental thing because that's where the blue bloods and the red bloods, I believe, came from. The royalty were always kind of sickly, and the peasants were always kind of like had rosy cheeks. You know what I mean? So like the royals were always kind of like blue, and the peasants were always kind of like hardy. So I believe the theory is your immune system to kind of combat this RH positive we have in our blood. It's always combating it, so our immune systems are very strong. So people, so don't look down like, oh, I'm positive. It's a way it helps your immune system battle disease. But I mean, that first class petty officer that was interviewing me for the program, he said, don't worry, we can fix that. He said a med bed can fix that. So it's very easily fixed by a med bed, but it's just an outside kind of virus disease. I don't know what you'd want to call it that, affects us, and the ETs don't want to be around it. So anybody who joins the program, they get that, RH positive taken out. And then when you go into the age regression chamber, which is different than a med bed, Robert explained to me that it was like a chamber that kind of puts you in stasis, and you're given like a series of injection over weeks. And they actually have to send you further back in time from when you actually joined the program to be age regressed. And it's like a series of injections, and everything comes back. Like scars come back. If you were originally RH positive, that comes back. It's almost like a photograph was taken of your body, and you're brought back to the exact same way you were 20 years ago. If you're missing teeth, those teeth come out. The drones come, which are the little, the top right-hand corner of your screen kind of things. They're almost like, organic machines. They can precisely drill the titanium screw back into your bone and put the tooth back on if you had an implant or anything like that. They can do these things exact because they're organic machines with kind of like a shared consciousness, I guess I would say. But the ones I saw were more of a lighter brown with like a hue of pink about them, with a fold of skin that went from the tear duct to like the cheekbone, but the big black eyes, hardly any nose, small mouth, no nipples, no navel, no genitals. But it had 5 fingers, not 3, but they're extremely long, and the palms were extremely long. And that was like my initiation into the program. Was they wanted to see my reaction by seeing one of these, drones, they call them, take a computer apart. It was just like a Dell computer on the floor, and it took it apart with like a little drill it had in its hand in seconds. Like took out the gigs of RAM, put them back in, slid it back on, put the screws back in. It was like a machine. It was so precise.
Oh, we had one more question. This is the last one. This one's from Michelle Petros. She wants to know, do you remember the name of the psychic that helped you? I think you mentioned the psychic helped you, because Michelle said she has memories of a reptilian guarding her bedroom door. So she'd like to try to I don't know, I guess I think that was it. Is that your question, Michelle? Put it. I think that was because she said she had a question, but it was before in the chat, so I wasn't sure. But do you remember the psychic who helped you or whatever?
I did not have a psychic help me. I didn't go through hypnotism to remember this. It was just Robert. Robert, before I got out of the military, I was in his office for like 2 hours, and he was just telling me all these things, just drilling me. And I was like, why are you telling me all these horrific? Some of it was good. A lot of it was bad. It was just like he described my torture in depth. And I was just like, why are you telling me this stuff? And he said, because I need you to go back into the chair, Daryl. He wanted me to go back into the density chamber and erase my memories. And I think he was like kind of telling me everything as a way to help me not kill myself. Because as I said, he told me that people most of the time, if they have memories of 20 years back, they kill themselves in the first 6 months. I think it was a way of saying, like, this isn't just your imagination. Like, this actually happened to you. And he was explaining all these things to me. But yeah, I didn't have a psychic. And if there was a reptile guarding your door, I mean, not all reptiles are negative, but they are reptilian in the sense of the royal cast, the ones that seem to have the muzzles. I don't know if you'd even call them royal cast because they're all males, and the Draconian Empire is ruled by a queen and her daughters. But I mean, the ones that were like in charge of the ship, the Dark Fleet that I was on, they seem to be more, they love to feed off loosh. I don't know if it's because they don't really have a wide array of emotions because they're reptilian, but they love that feeling of fear. It's almost like a drug to them, and they feed off of it. And then you have more of like the warrior caste or the working caste kind of reptiles, which are the bigger ones with like a flat face. And a lot of times they'll have ridges on their head, like almost like mohawks going all down their head. And a lot of times they're dark brown, gold crocodile eyes, like the slitted eyes. But they're more like they might feed on people, they might feed on humanoid beings, but they do it in the sense of like I would say like an act of nature, like they're hungry and this is their instinct, but they're not into suffering like the other ones with the muzzles like this. And those ones seem to be smaller, like around our height, but then you have the warrior caste and things like that. So it depends on what it looks like. Maybe it was doing something positive for you. Maybe it was guarding you because it had another like tell it to do it, like a more cruel reptile. I can't say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you one question more about the conference in St. Pete's, like in general, like because I know you grew up in the St. Pete's area, like or around that area, like or Florida, right? Did you ever see anything weird in St. Pete's? Because I told this on my other podcast. It seemed like some parts of the town were like repeating itself, and then when I was leaving Florida, I felt like I got caught in a time loop. Like I swear to God, there. You know what I mean? Like it felt strange. Like, did you ever did you ever experience anything strange like that, or is it just normal to you?
A time loop. It might be because we were by the beach and it's a lot of resorts, and we're getting taken over by condos. But I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. You go more into downtown, and that's the older area of St. Pete. I mean, I had kind of like a ghost experience as a kid where I don't know. I had like a cup thrown at me that was on a windowsill of a house of a woman that was like killed by her boyfriend, and it became like the haunted house of the neighborhood. And one of the kids dared me to knock on the door, and I tried to knock on the door, and on the windowsill there was like a Tupperware cup. I think it was orange, and it just flew off the windowsill like right before my feet. I mean, other things that I've seen fairy fire in the swamps. I was in Boy Scouts, like Kissimmee and things like that, which is like gas. Where the woods will just erupt with like blue flame, like blue light. And I mean, that could be something. That could be something supernatural, or maybe it was just the gas
Whoa.
from the swamp. But I mean, yeah, different events in my childhood. But this is just me individually. I experienced some strange things.
Yeah, that's and a lot of people in the audience are saying great show. A lot of people love this. I just want to have one more question for you. So, like, for people, like, do you feel like a lot more people are going to be getting their memories back? And like, do you have any advice for people that are getting their memories back?
I feel like there's a mass awakening. I feel like a lot of people feel like they're going through a harder time or stressful time, and that happened to me for a while. But then it's just like I could feel. I just feel like something is happening. And I think whenever you're going through growing pains, and I think the earth itself is going through kind of growing pains. And that's just the way it is. To evolve, you kind of have to go through traumatic events. And Robert even explained to me there's something called DNA memory, where he said we could step in right now and fix everything. But if we did, it would just happen again in 100 years. So this whole thing with the COVID shot, and a lot of our loved ones died from these shots. That's where I'm pretty sure that's how my mother died. She died from the turbo cancer and everything. It just took her. She got like the shot and all the boosters, and it took her in months. And he said it has to be that way. They have to allow that to happen because it triggers our DNA memory, and that's just the way human beings are. It has to be like a traumatic event, and that way we won't allow this to happen again because it's in our DNA memory for generations and generations. So yeah, the positive, Solar Warden could step in right now, back in 2006 and fix everything. But if they did, it would just happen again in 100 years. So we have to let kind of traumatic things happen that sticks to our DNA memory, that alters our DNA memory, so that the next generations won't allow this kind of corruption to happen again. And I think you had a second question. Do you remember what it was? I'm sorry, I kind of carried on.
I would say, do you have any advice for people that are getting their memories back? Like, do you have any advice for like, people that are starting to like, they feel like they've been involved in some kind of black ops program, whether it be Montauk or some kind of time travel or SSP or SRA abuse or targeting, or you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, my advice is you're not alone, and you were in a sense like a victim of all of this. I mean, we are all a victim in all this, a sense, because I mean, everything about our civilizations, our societies is kind of like enveloped with this negativeness, with you want to call it evil, whatever you want to call it, but it's in the TV, it's in the propaganda, it's in the news. It's just like it's hard to get away from it. Go out into the woods, become part of nature for a while. But I mean, my advice is, when it happened to me, I remember Robert told me, he was going down my timeline. He said that I would have an uncontrollable urge to talk about this, like publicly. Like I would want others to know. And it was just like, he couldn't describe it himself. And I couldn't describe it whenever all these revelations came back to me. And it had to do with like traumas in my childhood, where I had all these suppressed memories. And it was one trauma after another trauma after another trauma. And then it was just like, oh yeah, that guy Robert told me all this stuff for like 2 hours in his office. And I was just like, how did I forget that? And it just became like a suppressed memory. So it was almost like I had to kind of figure myself out. And the best way to do that is to feel safe. you know, and I know it's not easy in this world, in this density. People are worried about car payments and home payments and things like that. But I got to a point in my life where I felt completely safe. I own my own home. I wasn't worried about money. I finally got to a level, you know, where I felt completely safe about, you know, my finances and everything. And that's when my mind, my subconscious kind of released all this to my conscious. And that's how everything opened up. And yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I would say is you're not alone. And I think people will take comfort, solace in that and things like that. And that's my greatest advice. And just let it kind of flow naturally, like whatever you're feeling, whatever your triggers are. And Robert explained it to me that it would happen in real time. He said your memories are going to come back in real time. And they kind of did, but they all flooded at once only about 6 years ago. And yeah, and that's kind of how it is. The memories up there are making more memories. The you down here will remember those memories. And so it's not like you could kind of see your future while you're in that program. It's just all of a sudden you kind of get these waves of memory, and you don't get memories every day. It's only whenever, you know, certain points of your life that really stand out, you know, just like actual life. You don't remember every single day. It's the things that stand out to you is what you remember.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, this was awesome, Daryl. I know we went a little bit over it as far as time. Thanks so much. And like I was saying, it was really cool meeting you again. You know, you're a really nice person and fun to hang out with. You know, and I look forward to seeing you again next year. And I'd love to have you back on. This is amazing, man.
Of course, of course. It was good to hang out with you too.
Do you want to tell people how they can follow you and stuff? And oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
It's the lag.
It's the delay. Yeah. Do you want to tell people how they can follow you? Sorry.
Yeah, it's DarylDJames.com. DARYL, D is in Delta, James.com. I have most of my videos up there. I'll put this one up there. And yeah, like I said, I'm about halfway on a book, and it's going really well. And I'm going to stay away from AI. It's going to be me. You know, I have someone helping me who's more, you know, knowledgeable on book writing, on storytelling. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it's going to come out, but you know, it's going to be soon.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, but thank you so much, man. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. And I'll be back tomorrow. And